Ever feel like you're stuck?
Yeah.
Just going through the motions day after day.
Yeah, like you're on autopilot.
Totally. It's like some invisible force is kind of running the show, and you're just along for the ride.
Well, it's incredible how much of our daily stuff, our behaviors are driven by these unconscious patterns.
Habits.
Habits, exactly. They're like programs running in the background, shaping what we do without us realizing it.
And that is what we're going to get into today. The hidden power of habit.
Rick, going deep.
Our guide for this deep dive is Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit.
Such a good book.
We're going to unpack the science behind everyday routines, from that second cup of coffee to that late night, scrolling on your phone. And if you're ready to break free from autopilot and start designing a life you love, well, stick with us, because we're going to reveal how to reprogram those habits.
It's pretty powerful stuff.
Maybe even hit that subscribe button while you're at it, because this is where it gets really interesting.
Duhigg lays out this framework. It's called the habit loop. It's simple, but it's a really powerful concept that explains how every habit, even the complex ones, operates on this three-part cycle.
Okay, break it down for us. What are the three parts?
They have the cue, the routine, and the reward.
So like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The cue is what triggers the whole thing. Could be a time of day, a place, your emotions, even just thoughts.
Like that 3 p.m. slump that sends you straight to the vending machine.
Yeah, that feeling of fatigue, that's the cue. Then you have the routine, that's the behavior itself. So heading to that vending machine, grabbing that sugary snack.
And finally, the reward, which I'm guessing is that temporary but delicious sugar rush.
Yes, the reward is what reinforces the habit, making you want to repeat it. And over time, this loop, it gets so ingrained you barely notice it's happening.
It's like you said, autopilot.
Exactly. Duhigg has this really great example in the book about a woman named Lisa who wanted to cross the Egyptian desert.
Oh, I remember that story. Incredible goal. But what does crossing a desert have to do with habits?
Well, Lisa realized that to achieve that, she needed to make big changes.
Uh-huh.
She was a smoker and knew she wouldn't be able to handle, the physical demands of the trek if she didn't quit.
Wow. So she used her desire to cross the desert as leverage to break that smoking habit.
Exactly. She used this intense desire to reach her goal as the reward that fueled that habit change.
That ultimate motivator. Something so compelling that it overrides those old cravings.
Yeah. You think about a habit you want to change. What's the cue that triggers it? What's that routine you follow? And what's the reward? What are you really getting?
Once you identify those three elements, you've taken that first step toward, breaking free.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got the habit loop down. How does all this play out in our brains? Is there like a habit center in there?
It's not quite a habit center, but there is this fascinating part of the brain. It's called the basal ganglia, and it plays a key role. This region is what stores habits. It lets us do complex things without really thinking about it. It's why you can drive to work without thinking about every turn or gear shift.
Like our brain's autopilot.
Exactly. To show how powerful this region is, Duhigg uses this amazing case study of a man named Eugene Pauly.
Okay.
So Eugene had brain damage that pretty much wiped out his memory.
Wait, so with that severe memory loss, he couldn't form new memories. How could he learn new things?
That's what makes it so remarkable. Even though his memory was impaired, he could still form new habits. Researchers saw this firsthand.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell us more about Eugene. What happened?
Despite not being able to remember his house or his neighborhood, he developed this habit of taking walks. And what's incredible is that he would always find his way back home, even though he couldn't consciously recall the route.
Wow.
His basal ganglia were still intact, they were guiding his actions, so he was using environmental cues like the shape of a tree or the color of a house to find his way back. Like his body knew the way, even though his mind had no memory of it.
That's amazing.
And there's another interesting detail. He would often come back from those walks with these little treasures he'd picked up.
Treasures? Like what?
Things like pine cones, rocks, even a puppy one time.
Oh, wow.
All thanks to his basal ganglia and those cues he found on his walks.
That's incredible.
The story really highlights just how powerful our subconscious is. So much of what we do every day is driven by these programs running in the background.
We think we're making choices, but it's our habits calling the shots.
A lot of times, yeah.
So we're these amazing, complex machines, but we're running on autopilot a lot of the time. But if we're just products of our habits, does that mean we're stuck with them? Is there any hope for change?
Absolutely. Understanding the habit loop is the first step. And Duhigg, he doesn't just leave us with the science, he gives us a framework for changing those habits.
Okay, so how do we actually break free from these ingrained patterns? What's the secret?
Well, It's not as simple as just deciding to change. We have to look at another part of the habit loop, and that's craving.
Craving. I thought it was all about cues, routines, and rewards.
Those are the core parts, but craving is what really glues it all together. It's how strongly we desire that reward that makes the habit stick.
Okay, I'm seeing where you're going with this. It's not enough to just recognize the habit loop. We have to understand the power of that craving.
Exactly. We have to want that reward badly enough for the habit to become ingrained. And Duhigg uses a great example to illustrate this point, the story of Febreze.
Febreze. What's so special about air freshener? I like a nice smelling house, but I wouldn't say I crave it.
Right. Well, when Febreze first came out, it wasn't successful. Marketers were focusing on, the problem they were solving, getting rid of bad smells. But sales only took off when they tapped into people's desire for something more, that feeling of freshness, cleanliness. They had to make people crave that reward.
So it's not just about taking away something negative, it's about creating that positive desire. And that applies to all sorts of habits, not just air freshener.
Exactly. Think about exercise. Starting can be tough, but once you crave that endorphin rush, that sense of accomplishment, that feeling of stress relief, then it's easier to keep going.
You start looking forward to that reward, and that fuels the habit loop.
Right.
Never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So how do we harness that craving factor to change our habits? How do we make ourselves crave the things that are good for us and break free from the unhealthy desires?
Well, Duhigg calls it the golden rule of habit change. You can't just erase bad habits.
Okay.
To change them, you keep the old cue and the reward, but you put in a new routine. So you're rewiring that habit loop.
So swapping a bad habit for a good one, but keeping the trigger and the payoff the same. I like that. It seems more manageable than trying to fight those ingrained patterns.
Yes, it's about working with our brains, not fighting against them. He uses a great example from football to show this, Tony Dungy's coaching strategy.
Tony Dungy, the coach who turned the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from a losing team into Super Bowl champs.
Yeah, that's him. And he did it using the golden rule of habit change. Instead of overhauling his players' whole approach, he focused on changing their reactions to certain things that happened on the field.
So how did that actually work? What routines did he change?
For example, he trained his defensive players to react to how an offensive lineman shifted his weight, rather than trying to guess the play the quarterback would call.
So they could react quicker and more instinctively.
Right. He basically replaced their old, ineffective habits with new, more effective ones, but kept the same cues and rewards.
So you keep the cue and the reward, but you replace the unhealthy routine with a healthier one. And over time, that healthy routine becomes the habit. It's like hacking your brain.
Exactly. You're training your brain to crave those good choices. That's where the power lies.
I love it. It's so practical. So now let's talk about those habits that have a ripple effect. Duhigg calls them keystone habits.
Keystone habits.
Keystone habits. I've never heard that term before. What are they?
They're small changes or habits that can set off a chain reaction of positive effects in other parts of your life.
Like how exercise often leads to better diet, sleep, even your mood.
Yeah, exercise is a classic example. Duhigg highlights a really good example with Paul O'Neill, the CEO of Alcoa. O'Neill's main goal was to improve worker safety.
Seems like a simple change.
It seems simple, but this focus on safety actually led to huge improvements in quality, productivity, and even saved the company money.
So by changing how workers thought about safety, he transformed the whole culture at Alcoa.
Exactly. It shows how a small change can trigger a wave of positive transformations.
It's amazing. A real testament to the power of those keystone habits. What a small change you could make that might unlock those positive effects.
Yeah, think about that. It could be something as simple as making your bed or taking a few minutes to meditate each day.
Small changes, big impact. It's a good reminder that we don't have to overhaul our entire lives overnight.
You start with the small, manageable steps.
And build from there. Now let's talk about another crucial element of habit change, and that's belief.
Belief, yeah.
So it's not just about the science and the strategies, it's also about mindset.
Absolutely. Belief can be that driving force that helps you break free from those old habits and create new ones.
So if we don't believe we can change, we're probably not going to put in the work to make it happen.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of. If you believe it, you're more likely to find that willpower, that motivation to make it real.
And Duhigg uses a really powerful example to show this, the success of Alcoholics Anonymous.
AA, yeah. Part of their success comes from helping people believe they can beat addiction, and this empowers them to change their habits and build a new life.
So it's not just willpower, it's believing that change is actually possible. And when you believe it, you're more likely to take action. So where do we go from here? We've covered so much: the habit loop, the craving factor, keystone habits, the power of belief.
It feels like a lot, right?
It is, but it's good.
We've only just started, but you're starting to see how these patterns shape your life.
It's like we've been given the keys to our own internal control panel.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep exploring this world of habits with us, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll be right back to go even deeper into this amazing subject.
It gets good. So before the break, we were talking about the power of belief and how important it is for changing habits. But belief alone isn't always enough, is it?
You're right. We've all tried to change habits, and sometimes it feels impossible, like those old patterns just keep pulling us back.
It's because we often try to change without really understanding how they work. We need to become habit detectives. Look closely at the cues, the routines, and the rewards that keep those unwanted behaviors going.
So a more systematic approach. Where do we even begin?
Duhigg gives us a step-by-step process. You start by figuring out the routine, the actual behavior you want to change.
Okay, so like realizing you're mindlessly scrolling through social media instead of working or, spending time with loved ones. What's next?
Then you experiment with rewards. It's not always clear what reward we're really seeking from a habit.
So we have to put on our detective hats and figure out what's driving that behavior, turning it into an experiment.
Exactly. Say you have a habit of going to the cafeteria every afternoon for a cookie. Duhigg suggests trying different rewards to see what satisfies that craving.
Instead of a cookie one day, maybe take a walk outside and see if that satisfies the need for a break. Or chat with a friend. Maybe it's not even about the food, but about connection or de-stressing.
That's it. Maybe it's not the cookie you crave, but something else entirely.
Once you find the real reward, you can change the routine, but still get that payoff. What about the cue? That seems tricky. How do we figure out what's triggering the habit?
It can be tough because those cues, they often fly under the radar. They can be subtle, seemingly unimportant, a specific time of day, a certain place, how you're feeling emotionally, even just a train of thought.
So let's say you want to stop checking your phone first thing in the morning. That urge to connect as soon as you wake up, that could be the cue.
Right. And once you see that cue, you can start putting strategies in place to interrupt that loop. Leave your phone in another room or replace that scrolling with a few minutes of meditation or writing in a journal. It's about intentionally breaking that automatic response.
This is making a lot of sense. Okay, so we identify the routine, we experiment with rewards, and we isolate the cue. Then what? Does the habit just magically change? Is there a secret formula?
There's no magic formula, but there's this great strategy called implementation intentions. You basically decide ahead of time how you're going to respond to a specific cue.
So instead of just wanting to change, you have a concrete plan for how you'll act in that situation, pre-programming your response.
Exactly, like that cookie example. The cue is 3:30 in the afternoon, the routine is going to the cafeteria for a cookie, and the reward is a little distraction and socialization. Your plan could be, when I want that cookie at 3:30, I'll go chat with a coworker for 5 minutes instead.
So you're replacing the old habit with a new one, but it's aligned with your goals. And this is where belief comes back in, right?
Absolutely. If you believe you can stick to the plan, you're way more likely to follow through when the cue happens.
Speaking of willpower, didn't we talk about how willpower itself can be a keystone habit?
That's right. Remember that study with the plate of cookies?
The one where people had to resist those delicious cookies? It sounded like torture.
Well, they found that the people who had to use willpower to resist the cookies did worse on tasks that required focus afterwards, like they were mentally exhausted.
So they didn't lack willpower, they just used it all up.
Right. Willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired if you overuse it, but just like any muscle, you can train it and make it stronger.
And that's where habits come in. Building good habits is like working out that willpower muscle, making it easier to resist temptations.
Every time you resist that cookie or you stick to your workout, you're strengthening that muscle.
Making it more resilient. So if you try to change a bunch of habits at once, you're basically overloading your willpower, setting yourself up for failure.
Like trying to run a marathon without any training.
You might start strong, but you'll probably hit a wall. So focus on one habit at a time, build that willpower, and then take on the next challenge. Much more sustainable.
Exactly. And remember, those small wins, they're crucial for building momentum and belief.
Like Paul O'Neill in worker safety at Alcoa, that one change led to so many improvements.
Right. Those wins in safety created momentum and belief that inspired more change.
Like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
One win leads to another and another. Pretty soon, you're rolling towards success. Now, let's explore another side of habits.
Grit.
Grit, that's a good one. Grip, that thing that lets people keep going when things get tough, like an inner fire.
Researchers have found that grit is a much better predictor of success than intelligence or talent, and you can cultivate it.
So it's not about being naturally gifted. It's about that determination to keep pushing. How do we build grit? Do we just have to grit our teeth and power through?
It's a little more than that. Grit comes from a combination of things. One is having a strong sense of purpose.
Having a clear why. It's like a guiding star. Keeps you on course.
Exactly. When your purpose aligns with your values, with your passions, it fuels your resilience, gives you something to fight for.
Your inner compass, always pointing you in the right direction. What else helps build grit?
Having a supportive community, people who believe in you.
So, finding your tribe, those people who cheer you on and are there when you stumble. It's so much easier to stay motivated when you've got a team behind you.
We're social creatures. Our relationships really shape our habits and behaviors.
It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want grit, find those role models who embody that quality.
Be that person for others, too. Grit isn't just individual effort, it's collective empowerment. Creating a culture where people feel supported.
Lifting each other up, celebrating those wins along the way, that's powerful.
And that leads us to social habits.
Social habits. So we're going from individual habits to habits that are like collective. What are they?
Social habits are those unwritten rules. The norms and expectations that shape how we interact. They're incredibly powerful. They can spread ideas, spark movements.
Like an invisible web that connects us all.
Yeah.
Give us an example of how social habits have shaped history.
Well, the civil rights movement is a great example. Like the Montgomery bus boycott, which started with Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat.
That act of defiance sparked a movement. But it wasn't just one person. It was a collective change in how people acted.
Exactly. People walked, carpooled, found other ways to get around instead of riding those segregated buses. It was collective action driven by a shared sense of purpose.
And that action was driven by social habits, the shared beliefs and norms that shaped how people behaved. So how did these social habits spread? Was it just people talking to each other?
There's more to it. Duhigg points out 3 key things about how social habits drive these movements. First, they often start by using existing social habits and networks.
So they leveraged those existing connections.
Right. With the Montgomery bus boycott, word spread quickly through churches, community groups, social circles. People joined because they were asked by people they knew.
A social chain reaction. One person inspires another and so on.
Exactly. And that takes us to the second thing. Movements grow when they offer new habits that create a sense of identity, a sense of belonging.
So you're not just joining a cause, you're becoming part of something bigger, something that connects you to others.
In the civil rights movement, participating in boycotts, protests, marches, these things became a way for people to express their values, to strengthen their community. They were creating a shared experience.
That shared identity is so powerful. It gives you a reason to keep going when things get tough. What's the third thing?
For an idea to really stick, to create lasting change, it has to become self-propelling. It can't just stay within that initial group.
It needs to be contagious. How does that happen?
By giving people new habits that show them where to go, what to do on their own, empowering them to take ownership and become agents of change.
So it's not about following a leader. It's about everyone becoming a leader.
Exactly. In the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and others, they gave people a set of new behaviors and beliefs that helped them take on leadership roles. It was like a blueprint for action.
So the movement provided these habits, which created a roadmap for change that could organically spread.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that can adapt to different situations. This applies to social movements, but also to your workplace, your family, your personal life.
It's about empowering people to become architects of their own destinies. Now, let's shift gears and explore the darker side of habits, how they can be exploited, manipulated.
The dark side.
It's crazy how these little automatic behaviors, habits, can have such a big impact on our lives. But as we've been saying, that impact can be good or bad, right?
For sure. Habits can be awesome tools for growth, making progress. But they can also be used against us, manipulated without us even realizing it.
That's a little scary. Like this powerful engine that can either take you to your destination or send you way off course. Give us some examples of how this happens in real life.
Well, look at advertising, marketing. Companies are always trying to tap into our habits, figure out our triggers, our cravings to influence what we buy. They collect tons of data about us, what we do online, what we buy, even our social media.
Like they're building profiles of our habits, our likes and dislikes,
Yeah.
then using that to kind of nudge us towards their stuff.
Exactly. And they've gotten so good at it. Duhigg tells this story about Target, how they use data to predict when women were pregnant.
Wait, seriously? How could they know that from someone's shopping list?
It's wild. They analyzed what people bought, like unscented lotions, certain vitamins, found patterns that were linked to pregnancy, and it was so accurate they were sending out coupons for baby stuff to women before they'd even told their families they were expecting.
That is both incredible and a little creepy. Makes you wonder how much of what we do is a real choice and how much is just habit.
Right. It's a question we all need to be thinking about, especially when all the technology and information out there, we need to be self-aware.
So how do we protect ourselves from these habit manipulators? Do we need to ditch all technology?
It doesn't have to be that drastic. The first step is knowing it's happening. Once you understand how these habits work and how they can be used, you can start to make more deliberate choices.
Take back control.
Yeah.
And it's not just about outside forces. Our own habits can lead us down bad paths, even when we're not fully aware of the risks.
That's true. Duhigg talks about this with sleepwalking. There's a case study of a man, Brian Thomas, who was accused of killing his wife while he was sleepwalking.
He was asleep when he did it. How is that even possible?
Sleepwalking is a sleep disorder where people do things without knowing it, and habits can play a role in those behaviors.
So if someone has a habit of, say, locking their door before bed, they might do that while they're sleepwalking.
Exactly. In Thomas's case, it seems he had a really strong habit of protecting his wife. So when he woke up confused and saw someone on top of her, that habit kicked in. Sadly, it led to her death.
That's a scary thought. These patterns are powerful, influencing us even when we're not in control.
It raises a lot of questions about free will. If our habits work even when we're unconscious, are we really in control?
Big questions. But practically speaking, how do we balance this idea of habits with free will?
Duhigg says self-awareness is key. The more we know our habits, the cues, routines, rewards, the more we can decide which behaviors to strengthen and which to change.
So become the architect of your own habits.
Exactly. Just like an architect designs a building, we can design our habits to be strong, to resist temptation, distractions.
It's not about getting rid of all habits. It's about creating habits that work for you, that match your values, your goals, and ultimately lead you towards the life you want.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a fascinating journey into these habits. From that habit loop to cravings, keystone habits, social habits, even how they can be manipulated.
We've seen how powerful these little automatic behaviors can be. They shape our thoughts, our emotions, our actions. And while they can be both powerful and risky, the good news is we're not helpless.
Right, we have the power to change.
We can understand them and become the architects of our own destinies, designing those patterns that will lead us to a more fulfilling life.
And who knows, maybe you'll inspire others to do the same. That's how we create real change in the world.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of habits. We hope you've gained some valuable insights, maybe even some inspiration to start shaping your own habits for a better future. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing.
And keep building those good habits.